and I guess this is where I kind of struggle a little bit with this, and I think a lot of Latter-day Saints too. We believe in eternal progression. Is a being all-powerful if they can't change their own nature?
Hello, Saints. My name is Jeff. I'm a pastor exploring everything I can about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And for the past year, it's been a little bit of a solo journey. I mean, I've talked to Latter-day Saints here and there, but for the most part, I've been exploring on my own. And I've reached a point with the channel that I feel that it would be better if I would explore alongside Latter-day Saints from time to time. So I wanted to share with you a conversation I had recently on Thoughtful Faiths, which is a Latter-day Saint YouTube channel run by a gentleman named Jacob Hansen. You might know who he is. And we had an extensive conversation about interfaith dialogue, about the relationship between Latter-day Saints and Evangelicals, and we even got into some pretty deep doctrinal and theological conversation. And I wanted to share an excerpt of this conversation with you to show why I'm wanting to have more conversations with Latter-day Saints. You'll see how we're talking about some pretty deep things as it pertains to the nature of God, but how that dialogue then leads us to have a really important conversation about the importance of who Jesus is and what he came to do. A link to the entire conversation is below in the description, but let's jump into this conversation just to give you a little taste of the type of dialogue I'm hoping to continue to have here on Hello Saints. Check it out.
I wanted to dig into this idea of, again, if you when you come from this view, there's a big question mark that comes in and says, well, what is the nature of this hyper reality, of this otherly realm? And what does it mean to even say that there is a realm there at all? And you said something interesting, that God has certain limitations based on his own nature, right? Mm-hmm. And we simply take that maybe a step further to say that God exists within a hyper reality, but that hyper reality is governed by law, and that hyper reality was not created by God. It is the realm that has always existed, always will exist, and exists of necessity. And therefore, in that realm of the hyper reality, there are what we would call in Latter-day Saint parlance, eternal law. And that God himself even is subject to the eternal nature of reality itself, or what we would call eternal law. He simply has mastered the highest level of being within that hyper reality, and he's trying to bring us into that higher level of being. And our conception of the kingdoms of glory is basically how far do you, within the hyper reality space, like what sort of a life are you going to have in that reality?
But that's definitely a diverging distinction to how we view the nature of God. So what we would say is, what in the beginning, God, what does that even mean? Again, we're placing that in a realm of mystery that we can't fully understand, or that we can't comprehend, I should say. But we don't think that God, we believe in the aseity of Christ, the independence of, or the aseity of God, the independence. He is not dependent or subject to anything.
Yeah.
So in his holiness and in his infinite vastness, though, how that existence looked before he created the earth or the universe, what does before even mean to a God who is outside of time? Okay. So again, we get into these really mysterious places based on our cognitive abilities, but we don't believe that there is a standard of holiness that God has attained to or is subject to. We believe that he is the standard of holiness.
He defines it. He the standard. He's the standard by which holiness is defined. His nature is that which we call holy.
And the same thing goes for love. Like there's not an idea of love that just so happens to exist out there. God is love. He is the one that, by his very nature, through his character, who he is the one that defines the reality of that. In a certain sense, his very existence is almost speaking all of this into existence for us. Mm-hmm. So that's a really important one, because God being independent, subject to nothing or no one, whether it be a higher being or even a higher law, we believe that he is the highest. And there is nothing higher. There is no one higher. He is Lord of Lords, Kings of Kings. He is above all. So So yeah, that would be a differing view in the nature of God, because we don't think that when God says I am, we don't see a God who is becoming. We see a God who is being. We are always becoming where he is. He is the I am.
But and I guess this is where I kind of struggle a little bit with this, and I think a lot of Latter-day Saints too, is that if God is not becoming, because we definitely believe that God is becoming. We believe in eternal progression, that his glory can grow beyond where it is, and that makes him not static. Is that it seems as though if he cannot change his nature, if God can't alter what he is, then God in some sense is a being all powerful if they can't change their own nature. Is that a fair, because I would, a lot of people look at it and they say, if God's all powerful, then he must be free, as the Bible says, to do as he pleases. But if he has a nature that cannot change, well, then he's bound by that nature and is in the ultimate sense not free.
Here's how I would challenge that. I'll challenge it with a word picture. That's the difference between viewing God's ability to change, comparing El Capitan to the ocean. And here's what I mean by that. If I tried to change El Capitan, this giant wall of granite in Yosemite, I can't. These are locked atoms that are not going in. It's granite, right? I can't change that. That is not how I believe the Bible teaches God. He is not chiseled in granite, this sort of unchanging wall. He's more like the ocean. If you dove into the ocean, you are displacing within that water where water once was. But there's no less water. Is God changing in that word picture? No, he's allowing himself to be affected, and he's making space for other beings, but it's not impacting the reality of that existence as an ocean.
Let me think about that, because I like that analogy. So the basic idea is that the ocean is always the ocean.
You're not going to change it.
You're not
going to change it.
You're not going to change the ocean. It is what it is. But the ocean is not something that's static.
Right. You can enter into it. You can interact with it.
Okay, I can see that.
So yeah.
And then it's really funny. So I actually think, again, sometimes the language games that get employed between our differences, can really mess things up, because so often when I hear traditional Christians talk about, this unchanging, immutable, immaterial thing, I hear them describing what I would call the eternal law. You know what I mean? What is the eternal law? But something that is immaterial, immutable, unchanging. It is the fabric of, as I put it here, hold on, let me come back. The fabric of this greater reality. That's what makes up the greater reality. Now, one thing that I think, and maybe Christians get accused of this sometimes, is that I feel like when God is in all places and in all things and is, it sounds like what you're saying God is the hyper reality that we exist in. He's the basis of being itself. He is love. He's not something within any of this. He seems to be this.
Right. So it almost sounds like pantheism to
exactly. And how do you make that distinction to keep that from happening?
Because this goes back to, again, it's that big theological term, the aseity of God, his independence. He's self-existing. So he has created a universe in which he is distinct from it, but can interact and be present in all of it. That doesn't make a rock God. The rock, by substance, ontologically, the essence of the rock is not God, though God has created it, but his presence is still all around it. Which is another reason why rabbit trail won't go down, why you're going to see mainstream creedal Christianity kicking against the whole idea of God existing in flesh and bone. We would say he is spirit in that sense, that he is in and through and around all things and present, conscious, but that doesn't make him those things. Again, this is why the parts of God that are impossible for us to totally comprehend. That's why the incarnation is so important. That's why it's so beautiful. That's why, like, I'll get emotional just talking about this, but look how personal he is.
Mm-hmm.
Look how
Absolutely.
knowable
And
he is.
that also I think incorporates the importance of Jesus Christ, because if God always just seemed to be this ephemeral thing, this is the way that I often put things. I say, look, first and foremost, I'm a theist. Okay. I believe that there is some sort of something bigger to this whole picture. I look around at the universe and I go, this thing, it ain't just what the reductive materialists say. We don't reduce to that. It just seems utterly clear to me. So I'm a theist all of a sudden. And then within the theist camp, I begin to search for this God, this whatever you want to call it, the higher power. And I often put it this way. If God never interacted with us, if you kind of go with the deist route, right? Mm-hmm. If God is so detached, then he's as good as not existing, right? Sure. It's like, if God has no causal effect or interaction with me, well, then what's the difference if he exists or if he doesn't?
Sure.
But so I want to look for God in the world, like in the reality that I exist in. And the incarnation of Jesus Christ is the story that I look at and I go, if God ever came to this world, I think that was it.
Yeah, right? I'm with you. I agree. I 100% agree.
And I think that's where you place your faith, is in this story of Jesus in the New Testament. But there's a ton of implications to that story. Like that only makes the mystery even greater, where now we're like, okay, now I'm a Christian in a broad sense, that I believe in, I want to follow this biblical Jesus. I think that story is in its fundamentals authentic. I think he died, rose again on the third day, and that he was who he claimed to be. But then we have to begin to parse out what that means.
This is where, going back to my rallying point that I was talking about before, that I'm having to do, when I step outside of my evangelical echo chamber, when I get out of my moody theological seminary paradigm of thinking, and I venture out into the wild world that is Latter-day Saint belief, my rallying point still comes back to, at the end of the day, this comes back to, what is our spiritual reality before Almighty God, personally, as individuals? We can try to grapple all day long with the mysteries of the universe and the mysteries of God's nature, but have you been reconciled? That's the question I keep coming back to. I'm not asking you. I'm saying, have you been reconciled? Have you been transformed by the power of a Almighty God who made himself so personal and express his love in such a beautiful way? Have you contemplated that is the missing piece that you're searching for as you're trying to make money, as you're trying to find the perfect spouse, as you're trying to find the perfect hobbies to fill your time? The meaning, the purpose, the love that is found in that transformed, born again, spiritual awakening that comes through Christ is the most important question we have to come back to at the end of the day as spiritual beings. And because what we're all looking for here, even as we try to grapple with all this stuff, we're looking for assurance. Mm-hmm. And I would say that to me is tied to the fact that we're not home. C.S. Lewis says that, if I find within myself a desire in which nothing in this world can satisfy, the most logical explanation is that I was meant for another world.
That's a great point. I love C.S. Lewis. You'll find that a lot of Latter-day Saints love C.S. Lewis, by the way. Our general authorities quote him regularly. One thing with that is I think what you're saying, and it resonates so strongly with me, is that what you're saying, we want assurance. I would also say we want meaning. And I think the reason we want meaning in our lives is because that gives us an assurance that what we do matters, that that this isn't all for naught. And I think that is the great message that Jesus brings, is that this fallen world isn't all there is, and that there is something that we would call redemption. I think in the details of that, we're trying to parse that out, and evangelicals have a particular view, and Latter-day Saints, have a particular view on some of the meanings of that. But I do think that there, like you said, if you go back to it, we do share that fundamental quest for assurance and for meaning in our lives.
And that comes back to what Christ came to offer. I frequently use this progression just as we exist as humans. just follow this chain with me. You have identity, meaning, purpose. Where does all that come from? You know, when you meet someone for the first time, one of the first questions someone asks is, "So what do you do for a living?" Why do we do that? Because we're wanting to proclaim, "I have meaning in this world. Like my life means something. Whatever."
I fit into some particular context.
Right, which is why we find identity in that, right?
Yes.
What do you do? So our identity is tied to our meaning, and our meaning then is tied to our purpose. And what Christ comes to restore a lost identity in us, take away the job, take away, I would say, take away the family, take away anything that you tie your identity to, tie it to Christ. And suddenly this almighty infinite God has defined your identity, given your life meaning, and now you live with a purpose. It's when we don't know who we are, life has no meaning, and then we see no purpose, that people lose hope. There it is. Hope. This is what Jesus came to bring. This is what the scriptures teach. Yeah. Because in all three of those areas, he brings hope. He brings a future. He brings him. So.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great note to end on, because I'm in full agreement there for any of the differentiations we have about maybe some of the details in that. I think that is the great message of Jesus Christ that I hope everyone in our faith recognizes that he brings to the world.
I want to say a huge thank you to Jacob Hansen for having me on Thoughtful Faith. You can find a link in the description to the entire interview, or you can just click right here, and be sure to come back here for more videos like this. So until next time, I'll see you later, Saints.